to your weekly World Climate Change News Report. Our headlines this week are: human activities are on par with El Nino and they're driving the climate crisis. Australia's seasons are impacted by climate change. The UK's first climate change refugees. Climate change destroying transport. Half of the beaches are doomed to disappear due to climate change. Telecoms sector moves to net zero emissions. Girls are the key to curbing the climate crisis. Thunberg questions the EU's fight against climate change. And without Arctic ice, the fish are at risk of living. Our first story: higher temperatures will occur in many parts of the world as the result of human-caused climate change. Even without El Nino phenomenon, the WMO forecasted a 35% chance of an El Nino and 5% chance of La Nina. However, regions in the tropics will experience warmer land temperatures. The WMO pointed out that climate change has stimulated the rise of the air and sea surface, as well as the ocean heat wave. Ocean heat is currently at the highest ever, as more than 90% of energy trapped by greenhouse gases is transmitted into the ocean. Our next story: Australia's seasons are impacted by climate change. Australia's summers have been prolonged by half due to climate change in recent decades, according to the Australia Institute. The hot season is approximately a month longer than 50 years ago and twice longer in duration than the winter, which is now 3 weeks shorter. Longer and hotter summers raise concerns on the possibility of Australia suffering from other devastating wildfires. Port Macquarie on the New South Wales saw their summer extended by 7 weeks. Our third story: the UK's fight against climate change refugees. The UK government has announced that the residents of 450 houses in Fairborn, Gwynedd, will have to relocate because of the rising sea level and climate change-induced coastal flooding. The announcement could potentially have created the UK's first climate change refugees. The threat of sea level rise has compelled government bodies to make the people move elsewhere, as the cost of maintaining flood defenses in disaster-prone areas is very high and poses significant risk to lives in case of a failure in the defenses. Next up, climate change is destroying transport. The destruction of bridges, roads, and railways are consequences of climate change, since transportation infrastructure is not in a position to withstand catastrophes. It should be noted that most of the time the infrastructure was designed centuries ago, which is why climate change was not considered. The greatest risks are flooding due to high rainfall and extreme storms, rising sea levels and increased wave activity, rising temperatures, and permafrost melting. Environmentalists recommend that countries adopt their infrastructure to climate change. Next, half of the world's beaches are doomed to disappear due to climate change. A new study published in the journal Nature Climate Change predicts that by the end of the century, half of the world's sandy beaches will have retreated, and measures adopted by governments are expected to become more expensive and, in some cases, even unsustainable. Climate change threatens the wildlife and coastal sediments, which won't be protected from the rising sea levels and storm surges anymore. If carbon emissions keep growing at the current rate, sea levels will rise even more than these estimates. Next, the telecommunications sector moves to net zero emissions. The information and communication technology industry is taking a step towards tackling climate change by releasing the very first science-based pathway to reduced greenhouse gas emissions in the telecom sector. Introducing a new science-based target, which is in par with the Paris Agreement, includes emissions reduction trajectories for mobile, fixed, and data center operators that will help in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Our next story: girls are the key to curbing the climate crisis. Supporting girls in education from an early age may be the newest frontier in the fight against climate change, as they will be the educators of the future. According to studies, the female contribution could very well give disproportionately positive contributions to the debate on climate change. In this moment, the great leaders in defense of the environment, the most powerful ones that in the near future will be responsible for a better world, are females. Next up, Thunberg questions the EU's fight against climate change. Leaders of the European Union have announced a climate law designed to tackle climate change and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. The new law would give the European Commission powers to set tougher climate goals for governments. However, the powers would not begin until 2030. Climate activist Greta Thunberg has accused the European Parliament's Environment Committee that they are ignoring reality and focusing on climate laws with a target 3 decades in the future. Our next story, tropical forests lost the ability to absorb carbon. The world's tropical forests will be unable to soon absorb carbon dioxide, and they will therefore lose the ability to tackle climate change, according to a study by the University of Leeds. From tackling 300,000 trees over 30 years, the research team found that the tropical forests will instead become carbon emitters after losing their ability to remove CO2. Researchers warn that this is the most alarming effect of climate change, and it started to take place much earlier than the most pessimistic climate projections. Climate change causes temperature increases and droughts, and this drives the number of dying trees releasing stored up CO2. Next up, without Arctic ice, the fish are at risk of living. Recent publications claim that climate change and decreased Arctic ice are the causes of fish farming decline. Climate projections are not encouraging, putting many wild species at risk of extinction. Human activity in the polar zones causes the decrease of certain species of fish, helping this also to make their disappearance accelerate. Governments must take the necessary measures to stop Arctic exploitation and to tackle climate change in order to conserve the biodiversity. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more weekly world climate updates.